Have you ever worked alone at night? When the world's asleep? And something watches from the dark? These are 10 true night shift horror stories. Real encounters that still haunt the people who lived them. Let's begin. Sarah worked the night shift at a small hotel. 3 floors, 40 rooms, usually quiet. Her shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Most nights, nothing happened. She'd sit behind the desk, check cameras, watch videos on her phone. The lobby was simple. A desk, some couches, a TV, vending machines in the corner. Behind the desk was a small office with a computer and a glass window overlooking the lobby. At night, the front doors locked automatically. Guests had to buzz in. Sarah would press a button to let them through. After midnight, barely anyone came in, just the occasional late guest. But one night changed everything. Around 11 p.m., a man buzzed the door. Sarah let him in. He looked mid-40s, tall, wearing jeans and a baseball cap, carrying a backpack. He walked up and asked for a room. Sarah told him the price. He nodded and pulled out a card. She swiped it. It beeped like it went through. She gave him a key card for room 214 on the second floor. He looked at her for a few seconds too long. His eyes stayed on her face even after she handed him the key. His expression was completely blank. Then he turned and walked to the elevator. Something felt off, but Sarah couldn't explain what. She sat back down and scrolled on her phone. Around midnight, she looked up. The man was back in the lobby. He didn't come to the desk. He just walked past her and sat down on one of the couches. The TV wasn't even on, but he sat there facing it. Sarah figured maybe he couldn't sleep. Some guests hang out in the lobby sometimes, but then 30 minutes passed. He was still sitting there, not on his phone, not reading, not dozing off, just staring straight ahead at the blank TV screen. Sarah got up to grab water from the vending machine. As she walked across the lobby, she felt him turn his head. She could feel his eyes following her the whole way. She didn't look directly at him, but the feeling was unmistakable. It made her stomach turn. Around 1 a.m., she was checking the reservation system on the computer. She pulled up the occupied room list. Room 214 showed vacant. Sarah whispered under her breath. She'd just checked this guy in an hour ago. She thought maybe she made a mistake. She looked at the check-in logs. Nothing. No name, no charge, nothing. Then she checked the transaction screen. No payments. She remembered swiping his card and hearing it beep, but there was nothing in the system at all. Her hands started shaking. She picked up the phone and called room 214. It rang 10 times. No answer. Then she checked the key card entry log. It showed nothing. No one had entered that room all night. That's when Sarah realized he never even went to the room after she gave him the card. She looked over at the lounge. There he was, still sitting there, staring at the TV that wasn't on. An awful feeling filled her chest. She sat there debating what to do. Part of her thought maybe the system glitched, but the facts were clear. No entry log, no charge. He wasn't checked in. She waited another 15 minutes, just watching him. Around 1:30 a.m., she walked over and asked if everything was okay. He turned his head and looked at her with no expression. His voice was flat when he spoke. "I just can't sleep." Then he turned back toward the TV. Sarah nodded and went back behind her desk. Her hands were shaking badly now. Around 2 a.m., she noticed he wasn't in the lounge anymore. Her stomach dropped. She didn't see him in the lobby at all. She scanned the area. Then she spotted him standing at the end of the hallway by the bathrooms, half hidden in the dark. just standing completely still. Sarah kept glancing up at him, pretending to work on the computer. He stood there for several minutes. Then he slowly walked back and sat in the lounge again like nothing happened. She called her manager at home. She explained what was going on. Her manager sounded tired and told her to keep an eye on him and call the police if he did anything threatening. Sarah hung up thinking it already felt threatening. She checked the security cameras. She saw him on the first floor hallway camera. He walked all the way down the hall, stopped at the end, stood there for several minutes, then walked back. Later, he went into the stairwell and stayed there for about 10 minutes. She had no idea what he was doing in there. Every time she looked up from the computer, he was somewhere else. Near the vending machines, by the elevators, once just standing near the corner of the lobby where the light didn't reach well. He was always staring. By 3:30 a.m., Sarah couldn't take it anymore. She called the non-emergency police line and explained that there was a man in the hotel who she didn't think was a guest. They said they'd send someone. While she was waiting, she noticed he moved again, this time closer to the desk. He was standing maybe 15 feet away, just watching her. He didn't blink much. He didn't speak. He just stared. Sarah pretended to type on the computer, but she was so scared she could hardly breathe. At 3:50 a.m., the buzzer went off. She thought maybe it was the cops, but it was just another guest coming back late. She let him in quickly. The man turned his head and watched the guest walk across the lobby. Sarah noticed his eyes follow every step. That scared her even more. It was like he was studying him. A few minutes later, the man disappeared again. Sarah checked the cameras and saw him standing outside one of the guest room doors on the first floor. He was literally just standing there. That's when she called actual 911. She told them he was outside a guest's room and she didn't know what he was trying to do. They said officers were on the way. She kept her eyes glued to the camera feed. He stood at the door for about 3 minutes, then slowly walked back to the lobby. When he came back, he walked right up to the desk and leaned over the counter. He looked at Sarah and asked if there was any food. His voice was so low it was disturbing. She told him there were vending machines in the corner. He gave a small smile, then walked away. Sarah just sat there staring at the clock, begging the cops to get there. Finally, around 4:10 a.m., 2 officers showed up. She let them in and pointed right at him. He was back in the lounge, sitting down. They walked over and talked to him for a few minutes. They asked for his ID and asked him questions Sarah couldn't hear. Then they walked him out. One officer came back and explained everything. The guy wasn't a guest at all. The credit card he gave Sarah was stolen. He had no bags and no reservation. He'd just been pretending so he could get access to the building. They charged him with trespassing and credit card fraud. After they left, Sarah sat there shaking until her shift was over. Every time she looked at the cameras, she expected to see him again. The part that messed her up the most was realizing he'd been inside the hotel for hours, wandering around, standing outside guest rooms, watching her from different spots. And he was never even supposed to be there. Sarah had no idea what his plan was, but she knew it wasn't good. That was the scariest night of her life. Story 2. The Gas Station Watcher. Meredith is 24. She works the night shift at a tiny gas station off County Road 11. It's the kind of place most people don't notice unless they're out of gas or completely lost. She took the job because it was quiet and predictable. At least it used to be. It started on a Thursday night around 1 a.m. The air outside was wet and still. The hum of the overhead lights had been getting under her skin all shift. She was about to microwave a cinnamon roll she didn't even want when the door chimed. A man walked in. Mid-40s, maybe older. He had a green coat, messy hair, and dry lips like he hadn't smiled in years. He didn't head for the coffee or chips like most people. He just stood near the counter staring at Meredith with a strange kind of familiarity. "Hi," she said, forcing a polite smile. The man said, "You always work this late?" Meredith blinked. Yeah, mostly," he smiled. "I figured. I've passed through a few times. Noticed it's always you." That unsettled her more than she let show. "Oh, yeah, small town." He didn't leave. Meredith, right? She froze. She wasn't wearing a name tag. She was about to ask him how he knew, but he spoke first. "You have nice handwriting." He motioned to the whiteboard where she'd written, "Cinnamon coffee is back." Most people dot their I's like circles. You use little slashes. It's very specific, thoughtful. Meredith didn't respond. He didn't buy anything. He just stood there for another minute watching her like he was studying her reactions. Then he finally nodded. "I'm Paul," he said. "Just curious, that's all." Then he walked out into the fog. After that, he started showing up randomly. Not every night. Not enough to scream stalker out loud, but often enough that Meredith stopped assuming it was a coincidence. Sometimes he'd come inside. Sometimes he'd just sit in his car near the edge of the lot with his headlights off. One night, she tried to ignore him. He came in, bought a bottle of water, and lingered like always. "You're quieter tonight," he said. "Long shift," Meredith muttered. He slowly looked around the store like he was taking inventory of everything. "It must get lonely," he said. "Just you out here in the dark? No one else for miles. I'm fine." He leaned on the counter. "You ever get scared? Being a woman alone at night?" His voice wasn't threatening. That's what made it worse. It was curious, neutral, like he was asking about the weather. Meredith stepped back. "Do you need anything else?" He tilted his head. "You always keep the door to the back room locked. Smart. I noticed you check it around 2 a.m. almost every night." Her stomach turned. She didn't answer. "I'll let you get back to it," he said with a soft, almost apologetic smile. "Didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." Then he walked out again. After that night, Meredith started walking to her car with her keys between her fingers. She kept a tire iron under the counter. She changed the curtains in her apartment. Started showering with the bathroom door locked, even when no one else was home. There were nights he didn't come. Sometimes she'd go a whole week without seeing him. But it didn't help. It actually made it worse because she never knew when he'd reappear, like the time she came back from her 10-minute break to find a Polaroid on the counter. It was her refilling the windshield washer bin behind the station. Taken from that night, close up, way too close. There was no note with it, but the slash dot on the I and the word windshield on the bin label had been circled in red ink. The next time he came in, Meredith told him to leave. She told him if he stayed, she'd call the police. Paul just nodded. "I get it. I've been too forward. You've been following me," she said. Her voice cracked and she hated that it did. "I just think you're the kind of person who's used to being misunderstood," he said. "I thought maybe you'd appreciate someone who pays attention. That's not paying attention. That's obsession." He didn't flinch. "Would it be easier if I wore a smile and brought a soda every night?" Would I be more normal if I just talked about sports and pretended I didn't notice the way your shoes are always a half size too big? Or how your left eyelid twitches when you're tired? By this point, Meredith was already dialing 911. He didn't stop her. The police came quickly. He didn't resist. He just stood there, arms at his sides, waiting. They searched his car and found a notepad filled with dates and times. It was Meredith's schedule. Notes about her walk, her clothes, her groceries. One page just had her name written over and over again in tighter and tighter loops until it turned into scribbles. He kept telling the cops the same thing. I just notice things. I'm just a curious guy. The restraining order went through that week. Now Meredith doesn't work nights anymore. She doesn't even live in the same town. The company transferred her to another station 2 hours away. But even now, when she drives home and sees headlights behind her for too long, she feels the back of her neck tingle. And sometimes she still thinks about the way he said her name. Like he already knew what it would sound like in his mouth. Like he'd been practicing it. Story 3, The Midnight Visitor. Jessica is 22. She works the overnight shift at a 24-hour gas station. She's been there just under 2 months. She works the weekend shifts, Thursday through Saturday, while her coworker Max works Sunday through Wednesday. One night, Max and his friend Ben came into the station at about 2:30 a.m. to get coffee and say hi. Max and Ben had taken some magic mushrooms a couple hours before, so when Jessica saw them, they were all giggly. Honestly, it was pure entertainment for her. As they were talking about random stuff, Ben made a comment about a car parked in the parking lot with its lights off, but running with someone inside. He said the car had been there before they pulled in. He said when he questioned the guy said he was waiting for a DoorDash order. Normally, that wasn't out of the ordinary for DoorDashers to wait in their car while the station packed an order. What was odd was Jessica hadn't received an order in almost 2 hours. She'd spent most of the night in the back of the store cleaning, away from the registers and front doors, so she couldn't even see the parking lot. They waved it off as nothing. The two guys went outside to smoke a cigar and play with Max's dog, who they'd brought along. At first, Jessica didn't think much of it. But once she was alone, she thought it was a little weird considering she didn't know how long the car had been out there before her coworker came in. Fast forward about an hour and they came back in to get more coffee. That's when Max told her more about the car. It had been parked in a spot that even when she went to the register, she couldn't see it because of the wall. He told her that the entire hour they were outside playing with his dog and smoking in the parking lot. The man in the car had switched between watching them and looking like he was texting someone on his phone. When Ben noticed this, in his very high state, he walked over to the car and asked, "What's up? Why are you looking at us?" At that point, the man tried to pretend he didn't speak English. When that didn't work, he switched to English and started saying he must have had the wrong address before speeding out of the parking lot. But what made it really creepy was what Max said next. The car looked brand new and had no license plate. He also noticed there was a pile of blankets in the back seat, enough to hide someone under. And when the man was confronted, another car had just pulled into the lot with its lights off. A car that also looked brand new and had no license plates. And as soon as the first car started driving away, the car that had just pulled in immediately followed them out. Max stayed another 15 minutes before heading out. He told Jessica to be careful and to keep an eye out. At about 6 a.m., he came back in for more coffee. He was definitely sober now, so they talked more about it. He said the guy was acting super suspicious the entire time they were out there. constantly checking his phone, watching the entrance to the parking lot, watching the doors to the store. Even Max admitted that he was freaked out. And once he came down from his high, he wanted to check on Jessica to make sure she was all right. They both decided that if Max and Ben hadn't been there, this whole scenario could have gone very differently. Jessica didn't know if it was a coincidence or if those two cars were planning on doing something to her as soon as Max and Ben left and she was alone. Jessica carries a knife on her for protection, but her gut told her that from what they described, if there were multiple people, it might not have been any good. And if Max and Ben hadn't been there just playing like kids in the parking lot, something terrible might have happened. Jessica worked again the next night. And she really wished she didn't have an update, but she did. The car came back. It was about 3 a.m., and she was mopping the floors when 4 guys came in to get coffee and some snacks. She was ringing them up when one of them asked if she knew anything about the car at the far end of the parking lot running, with its lights off. Jessica looked at the man and asked what car. He went on to tell her there was what looked like a brand new Subaru with no license plates running with what looked like 2 guys arguing in the front seats. Jessica could feel her heart drop into her stomach. She told the group that a car with that same description had been sitting in the parking lot the night before with only 1 guy in it. The man who seemed to be the leader of the group told her that as they were pumping gas, they noticed the car had been there when they pulled in. It just sat there as they filled up their truck. He said as they were walking to the door, they passed the car since they were at the pump farthest from the doors. As they passed, they could hear a guy not quite yelling but talking pretty loud and pointing towards the doors of the store. As they passed, one of the guys started to walk towards the car to ask if everything was okay. When the guys in the car finally noticed them, they put the car in reverse and drove away. Jessica told them she believed that was the same car from the night before that had been acting suspicious when there were others in the parking lot. And when confronted, the driver seemed panicked before leaving with another car following him out. The group seemed alarmed. They offered to stay with Jessica for a bit to make sure the car didn't come back. She asked if they were sure. When they told her it was no problem, they hung around for about 20 minutes before everyone decided she was probably in the clear. She thanked them and let them top off their coffee for free before they headed out, and she was left alone. Nothing else happened the rest of her shift. But she sure as hell kept an eye out when she eventually had to go outside to change the trash at the gas pumps. What's scariest to Jessica is that not once did she see this car, but multiple people warned her about it. At first, she was hoping she was just paranoid, and it was really nothing. But to have the same car come 2 nights in a row at almost the same time and park in a spot that couldn't be seen from the register or the front windows made her wonder if her paranoia was justified. If it was, she was just glad she had groups of people show up so she wasn't alone if those guys in the car had decided to come in. Story 4. The Man Under the Desk. Daniel is 29. He works the overnight shift at a small rural motel. It's not a chain, just a family-owned place with 2 floors and maybe 25 rooms total. He usually works from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The motel doesn't get much traffic at night. Maybe a couple check-ins after midnight if someone's traveling through, but most of the time it's dead quiet. That's why Daniel took the job. He's not really a people person, so sitting in an empty building most nights works for him. The way it's set up, there's a main office with the front desk, some chairs, a coffee machine, and a little rack of brochures. Behind the desk is a hallway that leads to a back office. That back office is kind of like a lounge. It has another desk, a couch, a mini fridge, and a TV mounted on the wall. The cool thing is there's a little speaker back there that dings whenever someone rings the bell at the front desk. So normally Daniel just sits in the back, watches something on his laptop, maybe naps on the couch, and when he hears the bell, he gets up and walks to the front. He's worked there long enough to know the regular rhythm of the place. The building creaks sometimes. The heater makes a clicking noise. The front door buzzes when a guest uses their keycard after hours. Those are all normal sounds. But the thing about working the night shift is, even the normal stuff can get under your skin if you think too much about it. And sometimes the things that seem normal at first turn out not to be. This happened on a Tuesday night back in fall. It was cold outside, maybe in the 40s. The parking lot was empty except for 4 or 5 cars belonging to guests. It was about 2 a.m. when Daniel first heard the bell. He stood up from the couch in the back and went into the main office. When he got there, nobody was standing at the desk. The lobby was empty. He looked outside through the glass doors, but the road was dark and empty as well. There were no cars pulling in. No headlights. Nothing. Daniel thought maybe he'd imagined it, but the bell is loud and clear, so he knew he hadn't. He stood there for a minute, waiting to see if anyone came in late, but no one did. So he went back to the lounge. He sat on the couch, pulled out his phone, and scrolled for a while. Not even 10 minutes later, the bell rang again. Daniel jumped up and walked quickly into the main office. Once again, it was empty. The hair on the back of his neck stood up this time. He went to the doors and stepped outside. The parking lot looked the same as before. The cars were all parked with their lights off. There was no movement anywhere. The road was completely empty, too. He walked to the edge of the sidewalk and looked both ways, but there wasn't a single sign of life out there. Daniel went back inside and sat behind the front desk this time instead of going to the back. He figured maybe some drunk person was messing with him. A ding-dong ditch of sorts. Maybe a guest's kid thought it was funny. But after sitting there for 15 minutes with nothing happening, he started to relax again. He leaned back in the chair, opened his laptop, and figured it was just one of those weird things he'd laugh about later. Then the bell rang again. Daniel snapped his head up so fast it hurt. The lobby was still empty. Nobody in sight. His skin started to crawl. He stood up and walked around the front desk to make sure nobody was hiding, but there was no one. He checked the bathrooms off the lobby. He even stepped outside again. Nothing. He walked the lot a little, shining his phone flashlight, but it was just dead quiet. Daniel went back inside and decided to try something different. Instead of going back to the lounge, he sat down in the chair right behind the front desk. If someone was sneaking around and ringing the bell just to mess with him, he wanted to be there to catch them. He turned the lobby lights down a little so the room was dim. Then he just sat there listening. It was so quiet that every little sound made him twitch. The clock ticking on the wall sounded louder than usual. The fridge in the back office clicked on and hummed. Every couple of minutes, the building creaked as it settled. Daniel sat there with his arms crossed, staring at the bell on the counter. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. His eyes started to get heavy. He thought maybe the person had given up. He even started thinking he'd just imagined the whole thing. Just as he was letting himself relax and doze off, it happened. The bell rang. Only this time, Daniel saw what was doing it. A pale hand came up from under the front desk, reaching over the counter and pressing the bell right in front of him. Daniel jumped up so fast the chair almost fell over. He bolted down the hall into the back office. He slammed the door and locked it. He stood there in the dark, his chest pounding. His mind was racing, trying to figure out how someone could even be under there. The desk doesn't have much space underneath, but it's enough for someone to crouch if they squeezed in. That meant they'd been hiding just a few feet away from him. Waiting. Daniel forced himself to look at the security monitors. There were 4 cameras. 1 on the lobby, 1 on the hallway, and 2 on the parking lot. On the lobby feed, he saw the chair had apparently tipped over in his rush. The counter looked empty. Then in the bottom corner of the frame, he saw movement. A head poked out from behind the desk. Daniel couldn't make out details, just the outline and the glint of eyes staring straight into the camera. He backed away from the monitor. He couldn't look at it. He grabbed his phone and dialed 911 with shaking hands. He whispered to the dispatcher that someone had broken in and was hiding in the lobby. She told him to stay where he was and that officers were on the way. While he was on the phone, he watched the monitor. The person's head disappeared. Then he saw the person crawl out from behind the desk on hands and knees. The person crawled to the door and then stood up. He was tall and wearing a hoodie with the hood pulled tight. His posture was hunched over. Then he turned around and started walking around the lobby like he was looking for something. Then he turned and walked out of the camera frame toward the hallway that led to the back office. Daniel pressed his back against the locked door. A moment later, the knob rattled. Just once, a very slow rattle. Then nothing. The dispatcher kept asking if he was safe. But Daniel couldn't even answer for a few seconds because his throat felt like it was closing up. After what felt like forever, he heard slow footsteps moving away. He rushed back to the monitor. The man was pacing around the lobby again. At one point, he stood in front of the glass doors and just stared outside like he was waiting for someone. Then he walked over to the brochure rack and started flipping through the papers as if he were killing time. Minutes dragged by. Finally, Daniel saw flashing blue and red lights through the parking lot cameras. The cops pulled up, 2 cars. The man must have seen it too, because he suddenly bolted out of frame. A second later, Daniel heard the front doors open. When the officers cleared the building, they found a large rock near the front door that was presumably used to prop the front door open. But they didn't find him inside. He was gone. They searched the lot, checked the road. The officer told Daniel that whoever it was must have slipped out as soon as they pulled up. Daniel kept playing it in his head after. The way that hand just came up from under the desk and pressed the bell. Calm as anything. Now, every time he hears that bell at night, he thinks of that moment. He doesn't think he'll ever look at that desk the same way again. Story 5. The All-Night Diner Stalker. Rebecca worked at a 24-hour diner off the interstate. She was 26 and had been working the graveyard shift for about 8 months. The diner was one of those classic places with red booths, checkered floors, and a long counter with spinning stools. It was usually pretty dead between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., which was fine with Rebecca. She could handle the quiet. One Tuesday night around 2:30 a.m., a man came in and sat at the counter. He looked to be in his 30s, average height, wearing a gray jacket and jeans. Nothing about him stood out at first. Rebecca walked over with a menu and a glass of water. "What can I get you?" she asked. "Just coffee," he said. "Black." Rebecca poured him a cup and went back to wiping down tables. The diner was empty except for him. She glanced over a few times and noticed he wasn't drinking his coffee. He was just sitting there, hands folded on the counter, staring straight ahead. After about 20 minutes, he finally spoke. "You work here every night?" Rebecca turned around. "Most nights, why?" "Just curious," he said. "Seems like a lonely job." "It's not so bad," she replied, keeping her tone polite but distant. He nodded slowly. Then he pulled out his phone and started typing something. Rebecca went into the kitchen to start prepping for the breakfast rush. When she came back out about 10 minutes later, he was still there. "Still not drinking his coffee. Can I get you anything else?" she asked. He looked up at her. "Do you ever feel unsafe here? Being alone at night?" The question made Rebecca's stomach tighten. "I'm fine," she said. "We have cameras and the police station is just down the road." He smiled slightly. "That's good. You should be careful, though." "You never know who might come in." Rebecca didn't respond. She went back to the kitchen and stayed there for a while, hoping he would leave. When she peeked through the window, he was still sitting there. Around 3:15 a.m., another customer came in, an older trucker. He sat in a booth and ordered eggs and toast. Rebecca was relieved to have someone else in the diner. She kept herself busy serving the trucker, refilling his coffee, making small talk. The man at the counter finally stood up and walked to the register. Rebecca rang him up. He paid with exact change and left without saying another word. She thought that was the end of it. But the next night he came back. Same time, same spot at the counter, same order, just coffee. This time he didn't ask her questions. He just sat there watching her. Every time she turned around, his eyes were on her. It made her skin crawl. On the third night, he came in again. Rebecca was starting to dread his arrival. This time, when she poured his coffee, he said, "I like the way you move when you're cleaning tables." "Very efficient," Rebecca froze. "Excuse me?" "You're very methodical," he continued. "You start from the left side of the diner and work your way to the right. Same pattern every night. You also check your phone at 3:30 a.m., like clockwork." Her heart started pounding. "Have you been watching me?" He shrugged. "I just noticed things." Rebecca walked into the kitchen and called her manager. She explained what was happening. Her manager told her to call the police if he made her feel unsafe, but unless he did something threatening, there wasn't much they could do. The man stayed for another hour that night. He didn't say anything else, but Rebecca could feel his eyes on her the entire time. On the fourth night, he didn't come in. Rebecca felt relieved but also anxious. She kept looking at the door, expecting him to walk through any minute. Around 4 a.m., she went outside to take out the trash. The dumpster was around the back of the building. As she was lifting the bag into the dumpster, she heard footsteps behind her. She spun around. It was him, standing about 10 feet away, hands in his pockets, just watching her. "What are you doing back here?" Rebecca's voice was shaking. "I wanted to see if you'd notice me," he said calmly. "You're very aware." "I like that." "You need to leave," Rebecca said firmly. "Right now." He didn't move. He just stood there staring at her. Then he said, "I know where you park your car. Silver Honda, right? License plate ends in 472. That was it." Rebecca ran back inside and locked the door. She called 911 immediately. She told them a man was harassing her and had followed her outside. The dispatcher said officers were on the way. Through the window, she could see him still standing in the same spot. He wasn't moving, just watching the building. When the police arrived, he was gone. They searched the area but didn't find him. They took Rebecca's statement and said they'd increase patrols around the diner. The man never came back after that night. But Rebecca quit 2 weeks later. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there somewhere watching her. Even now, she gets nervous when she's alone at night. She always checks her surroundings, always makes sure no one is following her. She still wonders what he wanted, what he was planning, and she's grateful she never had to find out. Story 6. The Parking Garage Encounter. Marcus worked security at a downtown parking garage. He was 31 and had been on the night shift for almost a year. The garage had 6 levels and was connected to an office building. During the day, it was packed with cars. But at night, it was mostly empty except for a few vehicles belonging to people working late shifts. Marcus's job was to walk the levels every hour, check for any issues, and monitor the security cameras from a small office on the ground floor. It was boring work, but it paid well, and the nights were usually uneventful. One Friday night around 1 a.m., Marcus was doing his rounds on the 4th level. He was walking between rows of cars when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned around but didn't see anyone. The footsteps stopped. Marcus called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" No response. He figured maybe he was just hearing echoes. The garage had weird acoustics. Sounds bounced off the concrete walls in strange ways. He continued walking, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. He picked up his pace and headed toward the stairwell. As he reached for the door handle, he heard the footsteps again. Faster this time. Closer. Marcus spun around and saw a figure standing about 20 feet away, partially hidden behind a concrete pillar. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing dark clothes. He wasn't moving, just standing there staring at Marcus. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The man didn't respond. He just kept staring. Marcus reached for his radio. "This is Marcus on level 4. I've got someone up here who's not responding to me. Can you check the cameras?" Before he could get a response, the man started walking toward him. Not fast, but with purpose. His footsteps echoed through the empty garage. Marcus backed up toward the stairwell door. "Sir, I need you to stop right there." The man kept coming. Marcus pulled the door open and went through, letting it slam shut behind him. He ran down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. When he reached the ground floor, he burst through the door and headed straight for his office. He locked himself inside and pulled up the camera feeds on his computer. He found the view for level 4. The man was still there, standing right where Marcus had left him. Just standing, staring at the stairwell door. Marcus called his supervisor and explained what happened. His supervisor told him to stay in the office and that he'd be there in 15 minutes. While Marcus waited, he kept his eyes on the monitor. The man didn't move for several minutes. Then slowly he turned and walked toward the camera. He stopped directly in front of it and looked up. Marcus could see his face clearly now. The man had dark eyes and a blank expression. No emotion at all. Then the man smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was cold and calculated. The man reached up toward the camera. The feed went black. Marcus's heart was racing. He switched to another camera view, trying to find where the man had gone. He checked level 4 again, using a different camera. The man wasn't there. He checked level 3, nothing. Level 2, nothing. Then on level 1, just one floor above where Marcus was sitting, he saw him. The man was walking toward the stairwell that led down to the ground floor. Marcus grabbed his phone and called 911. He told them he had an intruder in the parking garage who was now heading toward his location. The dispatcher said officers were on the way. Marcus could hear footsteps in the stairwell now. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming down. He pressed himself against the far wall of his office, keeping his eyes on the door. The footsteps reached the ground floor. Then they stopped. Marcus held his breath. The door handle to his office rattled. Someone was trying to get in. "Police are on the way," Marcus shouted. "You need to leave now." The rattling stopped. Then Marcus heard footsteps moving away. He watched the monitor that showed the ground floor lobby. The man appeared on the screen, walking calmly toward the exit. He pushed through the glass doors and disappeared into the night. When the police arrived 5 minutes later, they searched the entire garage but didn't find anyone. They reviewed the security footage and confirmed everything Marcus had said. But by then, the man was long gone. The police put out a description, but they never found him. Marcus requested a transfer to the day shift after that. He couldn't shake the image of that man's face on the camera. That cold smile. The way he'd moved through the garage like he knew exactly where Marcus would be. Marcus still works security, but never at night. And he never works alone. Story 7. The Convenience Store Shadow. Jasmine was 23 and worked at a 24-hour convenience store in a quiet neighborhood. Her shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The store was small, just a few aisles of snacks, drinks, and basic groceries. There was a counter near the front with a register and a small back room where they kept extra stock. Most nights were peaceful. Jasmine would help the occasional customer, restock shelves, and scroll through her phone during the slow hours. But one night in late October, something happened that changed everything. It was around 2:30 a.m. The store had been empty for about an hour. Jasmine was organizing the candy aisle when she heard the front door chime. She looked up and saw a woman walk in. The woman looked to be in her 50s, wearing a long coat and a scarf wrapped around her neck. She had gray hair and moved slowly, like she was in pain. "Can I help you find anything?" Jasmine called out. The woman didn't respond. She just walked to the back of the store and stood in front of the refrigerated section, staring at the drinks. Jasmine went back to organizing the candy. After a few minutes, she glanced toward the back of the store. The woman was still there in the same spot, still staring. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The woman hadn't moved. Jasmine walked toward her. "Ma'am, are you okay?" The woman slowly turned her head. Her eyes were bloodshot and watery. She looked at Jasmine for a long moment, then whispered, "He's watching." "Who's watching?" Jasmine asked, confused. The woman pointed toward the front of the store. "Him." Jasmine turned around. There was no one there. The store was empty except for the two of them. "I don't see anyone," Jasmine said gently. "Are you sure you're okay? Do you need me to call someone?" The woman's expression changed. Her eyes widened with fear. "He's right there." "Behind the counter." Jasmine looked again. The front counter was clearly visible from where they stood. There was no one behind it. "Ma'am, I think maybe you should sit down. You might be feeling unwell." The woman grabbed Jasmine's arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "You don't see him? He's standing right there. He's been following me for weeks." Jasmine's heart started beating faster. She gently pulled her arm away. "Let me call you an ambulance, okay? Just to make sure you're all right." "No," the woman said sharply. "Don't use the phone." "He'll know. He always knows." Jasmine was starting to get seriously concerned. The woman seemed to be having some kind of episode. Jasmine carefully walked toward the front counter, keeping an eye on the woman. She picked up the store phone and started dialing. "Please don't," the woman pleaded from the back of the store. "He'll hurt us both." Jasmine was about to speak to the operator when she heard a loud crash. She spun around. The woman had knocked over an entire shelf of products. Cans and boxes were scattered across the floor, but the woman wasn't looking at the mess. She was backing away toward the far corner, her eyes fixed on something near the front door. "He's coming," she whispered. "He's coming inside." Jasmine looked at the front door. It was closed. No one was there. The operator's voice came through the phone. 911, what's your emergency? "I'm at the Quick Stop on Maple Street," Jasmine said quickly. "I have a woman here who seems to be having a mental health crisis. She's saying someone is following her, but there's no one here." The operator said they'd send someone right away. Jasmine hung up and looked back at the woman. She had curled up in the corner, her arms wrapped around her knees, rocking back and forth. "It's okay," Jasmine said softly, approaching slowly. "Help is coming. You're going to be fine." "You still don't see him, do you?" the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's standing right behind you." Jasmine felt a chill run down her spine. She knew there was no one behind her. She knew it was just the woman's delusion. But for a moment, she was afraid to turn around. She forced herself to look. The aisle behind her was empty. When she turned back, the woman was staring at her with an expression of pure terror. "He touched you. He put his hand on your shoulder." Jasmine instinctively reached up to touch her shoulder. Of course, there was nothing there. But the way the woman said it, with such conviction, made Jasmine's skin crawl. The paramedics arrived about 10 minutes later, along with a police officer. They carefully approached the woman and tried to calm her down. She kept insisting that there was a man in the store who was following her, that he was dangerous, that they needed to find him. The officer searched the entire store, including the back room. There was no one. They eventually convinced the woman to go with them to the hospital for evaluation. As they were helping her into the ambulance, she looked back at Jasmine one last time. "He's still in there," she said. "He'll wait for you now." The ambulance drove away. The officer took Jasmine's statement and then left as well. Jasmine was alone in the store again. She tried to go back to work, but she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Every time she turned around, she expected to see someone standing there. Every shadow seemed darker than it should be. The rest of her shift dragged on. She kept the lights as bright as possible and avoided going to the back of the store unless absolutely necessary. When 7 a.m. finally arrived and her replacement showed up, Jasmine practically ran out of there. She never saw that woman again. She never found out who she was or what happened to her. But for weeks afterward, Jasmine couldn't stop thinking about what the woman had said. "He'll wait for you now." And sometimes, late at night when the store was empty, Jasmine would get that feeling again. Like someone was standing just out of sight, watching, waiting. She quit 3 months later. She told her manager it was because she found a better paying job. But the real reason was that she couldn't stand being in that store at night anymore. Couldn't stand the feeling of being watched by something she couldn't see. Story 8. The Factory Night Watchman. Robert was 52 and had worked as a night watchman at an old textile factory for almost 10 years. The factory had been shut down 5 years ago, but the owner kept Robert on to make sure no one broke in and stripped the place for copper or vandalized it. The building was massive, 4 stories tall with dozens of rooms filled with old machinery, fabric rolls, and empty workstations. Robert's job was to walk through the building twice each night, once at midnight and once at 4 a.m., checking that all the doors and windows were secure. He'd done this routine hundreds of times. He knew every creaky floorboard, every weird sound the building made when the wind blew. He wasn't afraid of the dark or being alone. But one night, something happened that shook him to his core. It was a Wednesday in late November. Robert arrived at 10 p.m. and settled into the small guard station near the front entrance. He made himself coffee, checked his phone, and waited for midnight to do his first round. When midnight came, he grabbed his flashlight and his radio and started his walk. He began on the ground floor, checking the loading dock doors, the main entrance, the windows along the south wall. Everything was secure. He climbed the stairs to the second floor. This floor had been the main production area. Rows of sewing machines sat covered in dust, silent and still. Robert walked between them, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. As he was checking the far corner, he heard a sound. A faint clicking noise like someone tapping on metal. He stopped and listened. The sound came again. Click, click, click. Robert shined his light in the direction of the sound. It was coming from the stairwell that led to the third floor. "Hello?" he called out. "Anyone up there?" The clicking stopped. Robert waited for a moment, then decided to investigate. He climbed the stairs slowly, the beam of his flashlight bouncing with each step. The third floor was different from the others. It had been used for storage, and it was packed with tall shelves full of fabric boxes and equipment. The aisles between the shelves were narrow, and the ceiling was lower. It always felt more claustrophobic up here. Robert moved between the shelves, checking each aisle. Everything seemed normal. Then he heard footsteps. Not clicking this time, but actual footsteps. Someone walking on the floor above him, the fourth floor. Robert's heart rate picked up. No one should be in this building except him. He grabbed his radio and called the owner. "Hey, this is Robert at the factory. Did anyone else get authorized to be here tonight? I'm hearing movement on the fourth floor." The owner's tired voice came through. "No, Robert. You're the only one. Want me to call the police?" "Not yet," Robert said. "Let me check it out first. Might just be a raccoon or something." "Be careful," the owner said before signing off. Robert climbed the stairs to the fourth floor. This level had once been the administrative offices. There were several small rooms, a conference area, and what used to be the manager's office at the far end. The door to the stairwell opened with a loud creak. Robert stepped into the hallway and shined his light around. The offices were all dark and appeared empty. He moved slowly down the hallway, checking each room as he passed. Empty. 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 When he reached the last office, the manager's office, he found the door closed. He tried the handle. Locked. That was strange. This door was never locked. Robert had the keys to every room in the building, but he rarely needed them because all the doors were usually left open. He pulled out his key ring and found the right key. He unlocked the door and pushed it open. The office was dark except for the moonlight coming through the large window. There was an old desk in the center, some filing cabinets against the wall, and a chair turned away from the door, facing the window. Robert stepped inside and shined his light around. Everything seemed in order. Then he noticed something. The chair was facing the window, but it was clearly occupied. Someone was sitting in it. "Hey!" Robert shouted. "You need to identify yourself right now." The chair didn't move. The person sitting in it didn't respond. Robert's hand was shaking as he moved closer. "I'm calling the police if you don't answer me." Still nothing. He reached the chair and walked around to see who was sitting in it. When his flashlight illuminated the chair, his blood ran cold. There was no one there. The chair was empty, but Robert had clearly seen the outline of someone sitting there. He'd seen the shape of a head and shoulders. He backed away slowly, his breath coming in short gasps. Then he heard it again. Footsteps, right behind him. Robert spun around, his flashlight sweeping across the room. Nothing. He was alone. He ran out of that office and didn't stop running until he was back in the guard station on the ground floor. He grabbed his phone with shaking hands and called the owner back. "I need you to call the police," Robert said. "Someone's in here." "I don't know how they got in, but someone's definitely in here." The police arrived 20 minutes later. 3 officers searched the entire building from top to bottom. They checked every room, every closet, every stairwell. They found no sign of forced entry, no broken windows or doors, and most importantly, they found no one inside. The officers told Robert that the building was secure. Whatever he'd heard, whatever he'd seen, there was no one else there now. But Robert knew what he'd experienced. He'd heard those footsteps. He'd seen the shape in that chair. He finished his shift that night, but when he came back the next evening, he told the owner he was quitting. After 10 years, he was done. He couldn't explain what had happened, but he knew he never wanted to be in that building alone at night again. The owner hired a new watchman. Robert heard later that the new guy quit after 2 weeks. Said he kept hearing strange sounds and feeling like he was being watched. The building was eventually demolished. But Robert still thinks about that night. The empty chair that wasn't empty. The footsteps with no source. And the feeling of absolute terror when he realized he wasn't alone in that dark, abandoned factory. Story 9. The hospital orderly. Vanessa was 28 and worked as an orderly at a large hospital. Her shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and her job involved transporting patients, delivering supplies, and general support duties throughout the night. The hospital was a sprawling complex with multiple wings, 10 floors, and countless hallways. At night, many areas were dimly lit and quiet. Vanessa had worked there for 2 years and was used to the eerie atmosphere. One Saturday night, around 2 a.m., Vanessa was asked to transport a patient from the ER to a room on the 7th floor. She went down to the emergency department and picked up the patient, an elderly man who'd had a fall at home. He was sedated and barely conscious. Vanessa wheeled him to the elevator and pressed the button for the 7th floor. As the doors were closing, a hand shot through and stopped them. A man stepped inside. He was wearing street clothes, jeans, and a hoodie, which was unusual. Most people in the hospital at night were either staff in scrubs or patients in gowns. Visitors weren't allowed after 9 p.m. "Going up?" the man asked with a smile. "Yeah," Vanessa said, feeling a bit uneasy. "Are you family of a patient?" "Something like that," he said vaguely. The elevator doors closed and they started moving up. Vanessa kept her eyes on the floor numbers as they lit up. 3, 4, 5. "You work here?" the man asked. "Yes," Vanessa said, keeping her answers short. "Must be tough. Working all night. Taking care of sick people." "It's fine," she replied. The elevator reached the 7th floor and dinged. The doors opened. Vanessa started to wheel the patient out, but the man didn't move. He just stood there watching her. "This isn't your floor?" she asked. "I'll get off here too," he said, following her out. Vanessa's unease grew stronger. She pushed the patient toward his assigned room, which was at the far end of the hallway. She could hear the man's footsteps behind her. When she reached the room, she pushed the patient inside and was about to follow when the man spoke. "What room is this?" Vanessa turned around. "I can't give out patient information. If you're looking for someone, you need to check with the nurses' station." The man smiled again. I'm not looking for a patient. I'm looking for you. Vanessa's heart started pounding. Excuse me? I've seen you before, he said, taking a step closer. I've been watching you. You're very dedicated, always working hard, always alone in these empty hallways. You need to leave, Vanessa said firmly. Right now. Or what? The man asked, still smiling. You'll call security? Go ahead. I'll just tell them I'm visiting my sick grandmother. They'll believe me. Vanessa reached for her phone, but the man was faster. He grabbed her wrist. Don't, he said, his voice now cold and serious. Just listen to me for a minute. Vanessa tried to pull away, but his grip was strong. She opened her mouth to scream, but he covered it with his other hand. I said, listen, he hissed. Suddenly, a door down the hallway opened. A nurse stepped out and looked in their direction. Everything okay down there? The nurse called out. The man immediately let go of Vanessa and stepped back, putting his hands in his pockets. Vanessa ran toward the nurse. This man just assaulted me. Call security, now. The nurse pulled out her phone and made the call while keeping her eyes on the man. He didn't try to run. He just stood there with that same unsettling smile. Security arrived within minutes, followed by 2 police officers who happened to be in the hospital. They detained the man and took statements from both Vanessa and the nurse. It turned out the man had no connection to any patient in the hospital. He'd walked in through the emergency department entrance, which was always open, and had been roaming the hallways for over an hour. When the police searched him, they found a notebook in his pocket. Inside were pages and pages of notes about Vanessa, her schedule, descriptions of what she wore, routes she took through the hospital. He'd been stalking her for weeks, maybe months, and she'd never even noticed. The man was arrested and charged with assault, stalking, and trespassing. Vanessa was shaken but physically unharmed. After that night, hospital security implemented new measures. They stationed guards at all entrances after hours and required ID checks for anyone entering the building. Vanessa took a week off work to recover from the trauma. When she came back, she requested a transfer to the day shift. She couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability she'd felt in that dark, empty hallway. She still works at the hospital, but she never walks alone anymore. She always makes sure someone knows where she is, and she's constantly aware of her surroundings, always looking over her shoulder, always wondering if someone might be watching her. The man was eventually sentenced to prison, but the psychological impact on Vanessa remains. She has nightmares about that night, about his grip on her wrist, about his cold voice saying, "I've been watching you." She knows she was lucky. The nurse appearing when she did probably prevented something much worse from happening. But the knowledge that someone had been stalking her for so long without her realizing it still haunts her. Story 10. The warehouse forklift operator. Kevin was 35 and worked the night shift at a large distribution warehouse. His job was to operate a forklift, moving pallets of goods from the loading dock to storage areas throughout the massive facility. The warehouse was about 200,000 square feet, filled with rows and rows of tall shelving units. Kevin's shift ran from midnight to 8 a.m. For most of the night, he was completely alone in the warehouse. There was a supervisor who would check in occasionally, but usually Kevin worked by himself, which he preferred. The warehouse had good lighting in the main aisles, but some of the back storage areas were dimly lit. Kevin knew the layout by heart after 3 years on the job. He could navigate the entire space with his eyes closed. One Thursday night in early December, Kevin was moving pallets in the back corner of the warehouse an area they called Section D. It was about 3 a.m., and he'd been working steadily for several hours. As he was lifting a pallet onto a high shelf, he noticed something odd. In the aisle next to him, about 50 feet away, he saw someone standing there, just standing motionless between the shelving units. Kevin lowered the pallet and turned off his forklift. "Hello," he called out. "Who's there?" No response. The figure didn't move. Kevin climbed off the forklift and walked toward the person. As he got closer, he realized it wasn't a person at all. It was just a weird combination of shadows and a stacked set of boxes that from a distance looked like a human figure. He laughed at himself for being spooked and went back to his forklift. He continued working for another hour, moving through different sections of the warehouse. Around 4 a.m., he was in Section F when he saw it again. The same figure standing in an aisle about 30 feet away. But this time, it wasn't boxes. It was definitely a person. Kevin felt his skin prickle. He called out again, "Hey, you're not supposed to be in here. Identify yourself?" The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, facing Kevin. Kevin reached for his radio. "This is Kevin in Section F. I've got someone in the warehouse who's not responding to me. Can you check the security cameras?" The overnight supervisor's voice came through. "Copy that. Give me a minute." Kevin kept his eyes on the figure while he waited. It still hadn't moved. The radio crackled again. "Kevin, I'm looking at the cameras for Section F. I don't see anyone except you. Where exactly are you seeing this person?" "Aisle F12, Kevin said. "They're standing right there. I'm looking at them right now. I'm watching F12 on the camera. There's nobody there, Kevin. You're alone in that section." Kevin's blood ran cold. He was staring directly at someone, but the cameras weren't picking them up. "I'm not crazy," Kevin said into the radio. "There's someone here." "Just stay calm," the supervisor said. "I'm coming down there." Kevin didn't want to stay calm. He wanted to get out of that section immediately. But he forced himself to stand his ground, keeping his eyes on the figure. Then it moved. The figure took one step forward, then another. It was walking toward Kevin slowly and deliberately. Kevin backed up toward his forklift. "Stop right there!" he shouted. The figure kept coming. Kevin could see now that it was a man, though he couldn't make out any features. The lighting in this section was dim, but Kevin could see the outline clearly. The man was wearing dark clothing and moved with an unnatural smoothness, like he was gliding rather than walking. Kevin jumped onto his forklift and started the engine. He threw it in reverse and backed out of the aisle as fast as he safely could. He kept his eyes on the man who had stopped walking and was now just standing there again, watching Kevin retreat. Kevin drove his forklift toward the front of the warehouse where the supervisor's office was located. His hands were shaking on the controls. When he reached the office, the supervisor was already coming out the door. "What's going on?" the supervisor asked, seeing the panic on Kevin's face. "There's someone in Section F," Kevin said breathlessly. "I saw him. He was walking toward me." "Kevin, I'm telling you, the cameras don't show anyone." "Then check them again," Kevin insisted. "Please." They went into the office and pulled up the camera feeds on the computer. The supervisor rewound the footage to show Kevin what he'd been watching. On the screen, they could see Kevin on his forklift in Section F. They could see him get off and walk toward aisle F12. But there was no one else visible. No figure. No person. "Maybe it's a blind spot in the camera coverage," Kevin suggested desperately. "Maybe the camera angle doesn't pick up that specific spot." The supervisor shook his head. These cameras have full coverage. If someone was there, we'd see them. Kevin insisted on reviewing more footage. They watched the feeds from multiple cameras covering Section F and the surrounding areas. For the entire night, the only person visible in that part of the warehouse was Kevin. "Look, you've been working a lot of overtime lately," the supervisor said gently. "Maybe you're just tired. Maybe your eyes were playing tricks on you." "I know what I saw," Kevin said firmly. The supervisor nodded. "Okay, tell you what. I'll walk through Section F with you and we'll make sure there's no one there. Then you can take your break and get some coffee." "Sound good?" They walked back to Section F together, the supervisor carrying a flashlight. They checked every aisle, every corner, every possible hiding spot. They found nothing. The section was completely empty. Kevin completed his shift, but he was deeply unsettled. He couldn't shake the image of that figure walking toward him. The way it moved, the way it seemed to appear and disappear. When he came in for his next shift 2 nights later, the supervisor told him there had been an incident. Another worker, a guy named Tom who sometimes filled in on weekends, had reported seeing someone in the warehouse who shouldn't be there. He'd seen a figure standing in Section F, in the exact same spot Kevin had described. Tom had also called it in, and the supervisor had checked the cameras. Just like with Kevin, the cameras showed nothing. The supervisor was now taking the reports more seriously. He contacted the security company to check if there was a technical issue with the cameras in that area. They came out and tested everything. The cameras were working perfectly. Over the next few weeks, 3 more workers reported seeing the same figure in Section F, always standing in the same general area. Always in the early morning hours between 3 and 5 a.m., and always, the security cameras showed nothing. The warehouse manager decided to consult with some of the longtime employees who'd worked there for decades. One old-timer mentioned that about 15 years ago, a worker had died in the warehouse. He'd been crushed when a shelving unit collapsed in Section F. No one wanted to say the word ghost, but the implication was clear. The manager hired a different security company to install additional cameras in Section F, with better coverage and higher resolution. He also increased the number of workers on the night shift so no one had to be in that section alone. The sightings decreased after that, but they never completely stopped. Kevin still works at the warehouse, but he refuses to work in Section F anymore. He routes all his forklift runs to avoid that section entirely. Other workers have continued to report occasional sightings. Always the same figure, always standing still, then slowly walking toward whoever sees it, and always the cameras show nothing. Kevin doesn't know what he saw that night. He doesn't know if it was a ghost, a hallucination, or something else entirely. But he knows it was real to him. The fear he felt was real, and the memory of that figure walking toward him in the dim warehouse aisle still gives him chills.